I much prefer the sharpest criticism of a single intelligent man to the thoughtless approval of the masses.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all mankind. Your hosts here in London, Matthew Russell and Jamie Franklin.
Oh yeah, baby, Johannes Kepler.
Yo ho ho, Johannes Kepler.
Crimbo Kepler.
It's getting emotional, Matt, because this is the last podcast of the year. How do you feel?
I've got a little bit of a cold, Jamie.
Bit of sniffles, haven't you?
As we say goodbye to 2019.
Yeah, what a year. It's been quite the year, isn't it?
It has been very busy. December the 27th, though, Jamie, before it's gone.
Yes.
Johannes Kepler's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, Keppers.
1571.
He's old, man.
He would have been old.
He
if he was
is
still alive.
well old.
So long as the mother, ignorance, lives, it is not safe for science, the offspring, to divulge the hidden causes of things.
That's genius, isn't it?
Ooh, scary.
That's good. That's good.
Maybe that sums up 2019 better than anything else.
Kind of does, right?
So, Jamie, a quick space news that was happening just as we were recording last week's podcast.
Wait, you're not going to talk about Starliner, are you?
I am going to. We're going to have to talk about Starliner.
Oh, go on then.
If anything, this sums up our predictions for the year going terribly wrong.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Yeah. So, Starliner, afraid it had a bit of a hiccup on the way to
little one.
International Space Station. So, yes, Friday, just before we spoke to do the last podcast, and during our interview with Helen Sharman.
Your interview.
Yeah, it ended up being my interview, didn't it? An Atlas V rocket had performed perfectly and slotted CST 100 Starliner into a beautiful orbit. And it was at that point Helen Sharman and I looked at it and thought, oh, that's good news. However, at that point, Starliner itself was supposed to use its own thrusters and get into a much better orbit and start chasing down the ISS. But for some reason, that didn't happen. And do you know what that reason was?
Go on.
Well, this seems to be the usual thing with rockets, is that the clock was wrong.
Oh,
So it's something to do with the Starliner itself asks the mothership booster rocket what the time is, and it misheard by 11 hours.
Hello, mothership. Can you wind my watch up, please? Sorry, what was that?
Okay, yeah, I'll stick it to 11 o'clock. What, midday? Oh, okay. So anyway,
God.
The consequences of that is that, of course, now the Starliner thinks it's in a completely different part of the mission. Part of the mission it thinks it's in obviously requires more accuracy with its orientation to Earth. And as a result, it's using its own thrusters with a lot more aggression to keep this alignment really precise. It's going through a lot of fuel to make this alignment super precise. And while it's doing this, of course, it's drifting out of orbital position, making it harder for them to establish contact with the Starliner. And they've gone, well, where's it gone? And by the time they found it and are able to talk to it, find out what the problem is, and then correct it, Starliner's used just a little bit too much of its fuel up, aggressively doing this alignment manoeuvres.
Matt, call me old-fashioned, but in this day and age, with the millions and billions of pounds spent on doing stuff like this, wouldn't you have expected that there's just a quick fix? If, oh, by the way, let's just put something in the system that if it gets the wrong time, we press a button to reset it, all good. I mean, really?
Well, who knows? I mean, it's all software, isn't it?
I definitely don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm surprised by it.
It's really bizarre, but the amount of times we hear about a clock issue or an overflow issue, and it's a software issue, and you're right, it's the end of a multi-million-pound process.
Yeah, it just seems to be like, have you overlooked
seems a bit
that?
Odd.
Yeah.
Well, it's obviously very, very complicated. They can't all be making the same mistake, can they? But yes, by the time they'd discovered it, it's used up too much fuel, Jamie, and so it's not going to be able to get to the ISS and dock safely. So After that, they thought, right, let's just get it into a good orbit. So after that point, Starliner performed absolutely perfectly, got into a good orbit, got itself into a good insertion burn back to the Earth, and pretty much bullseye landing in White Sands on Sunday morning. Absolutely perfect.
Is that White Sands in New Mexico?
Yes.
Oh, I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see anything landing there?
No, but I saw a beautiful. I saw the moon there, very bright, and it was just a lovely experience, very surreal. I definitely felt like I was on another planet.
Oh, that's quite cool.
Yeah, that was the night, Matt, that I ordered from the local pub a chili dog, thinking it was a hot dog with chili sauce. Turns out, Matt, in America, that means chili con carne poured over a hot dog. And I'll tell you this, I wasn't disappointed.
I shall bear that in mind.
Bear that in mind.
So here's the big one, Jamie.
Yeah.
Can NASA let it slide, and are they going to allow Boeing to do the next crewed demonstration, or are they going to have to repeat this? So, and NASA's original contract, it actually says in the contract that the test flight needs to demonstrate automated rendezvous and proximity operations and docking with the ISS.
Sounds easy.
Well, obviously it wasn't.
No.
And Starliner didn't manage it. So are Boeing going to have to pay for a second attempt to do that whole thing? Or are NASA going to say, well, we've seen enough now. We're pretty confident you can do it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, that.
What's amazing is pretty much straight away, Boeing sacked their CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, straight after.
He's gone.
I think he's gone, mainly because of the 737 MAX crisis. But the embarrassment of this, I don't think, helped. I think it was probably the final straw.
In the nail in the coffin, yes.
But in slightly better news, SpaceX completed the 10th parachute test for the Crew Capsule Dragon 2. So it looks like SpaceX have just edged in front of Boeing for a crewed demonstration launch first. So that's going to be interesting. Whether that's going to happen in the spring or the summer is anyone's guess right now.
Elon is having a good month, isn't he?
He's having a better month.
Stock prices have gone up. Parachute test worked.
He's not going to have to pay millions to someone he called a paedophile.
Yeah, he's definitely on the up.
So before we get to our Helen Sharman review of the year, which is a long one, you strap yourselves in.
Well, we hope
really
so.
Just quickly run down what happened this year in orbital launch, Jamie.
Hit me with some stats.
As we record, there's been 99 orbital launches. Looks like that'll be 100 by the end of today, possibly 103 by the year end. And easily in the lead are the Chinese with 33, possibly 35 launches by the end of the year. So that is a trend that Helen
outstanding.
Notes.
Well done, China.
And they've actually, on the 27th, they've probably got their most important launch of the year, which is their Long March 5, which is similar to the Delta and Falcon Heavy kind of lift capability. So it's a super heavy lift vehicle.
Well, with their moon ambitions, Matt, it is very important. They need to get this right.
Exactly. And it looks like the Russians may have helped them fix it, but I don't know about that. I'd have to look further into it. But the US have only had 27 launches this year, and really only 21 if you take out the New Zealand Electron launches. Russia are one behind that on 20 if you take out the European launches. 23 if you include the European, and 25 possibly with the next two rockets, which is the last ever rocket and one of the last protons.
I don't like the word rocket. It's a bit weird.
It is a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Europe managed 6 or 9, including the Soyuz. India managed 6. Japan managed 2. And Iran didn't manage any, and everything they tried to launch failed.
Yes, 2 failures. Well, it's been a busy year, hasn't it?
Well, It's been a busy year for Zhejiang Spaceport.
God damn,
the busiest year. 13 launches. Not bad. And Soyuz 2 has been the busiest rocket with 15 launches. And if you compare that to in the early 80s, when Soyuz spacecraft were doing about 60 launches a year, makes you realise actually that the cadence of rocket launches has dropped considerably since the heady days of the 80s.
God damn.
Talking of Soyuz, though, Jamie,
oh, yeah.
do you want to listen to someone who's actually flown on a Soyuz rocket?
Well, I think we should.
Here is Helen Sharman, who was our first guest of the year and is now our last guest of the year.
I'm absolutely gutted that I couldn't make it because of flooding. But I'm so glad, Matthew, that you made it down to speak to the legend herself.
I'm a little bit jealous, Jamie, because you get to listen.
I know, I haven't heard this. I'm aching with excitement. Please roll it.
Écoutez.
The Interplanetary podcast, putting the ace back into space.
So, I'm joined on the podcast right at the beginning of the year, we had Helen Sharman. Right at the end of the year, we have Helen Sharman, Britain's first astronaut. Hello, Helen.
Hello, it's so wonderful to be back. And I can't believe that it's been only 1 year because so much has happened this year.
Oh, my gosh, has it? We haven't got a Jamie, unfortunately. Jamie's stuck in Brighton because his train got all soaked. So he's very deeply upset, Jamie, but we'll make up for it.
And we'll say a big hi to Jamie. And keep dry, Jamie.
So I thought what would be fun is if we went through what's happened since we last saw you, because it's been a busy year for sure. and I thought, well, if we take it month by month, because the one thing that I thought was quite funny, we tried to sum up the year, and this is what we actually said. We said, so what's happening in 2019? That commercial space, we're going to come of age and we're going to have a commercial moon landing, a commercial providers of astronaut flights, commercial space tourism, and commercial space internet. So we thought we were going to get all of those things this year. So unfortunately, my guesses were we're pretty wrong on all of those.
I think it's the commercialism, though. It's a funny thing, isn't it? So the more I think about commercial space flight, especially when we think about human space flight, obviously it's been happening for non-human launches for a long time. But actually, I mean, NASA's been contracting out, bigger and bigger chunks of its human space flight programs for a long time. And I think all that's happened really now is that they are very big chunks, and they're giving a little bit more of that of the ownership, let's say, to those commercial industries. But still, it is a contract basis, and it's still NASA that's going to be in charge, let's say, of launches to and from space station. I think it's when those commercial sides take the companies actually take just punters, people who just want to pay to go and have an experience. That's when I think we can really call it full commercial spaceflight.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is just a straight swap, isn't it, for paying for Soyuz seats or paying for SpaceX or Boeing seats. There's no real difference, is there, apart from, I guess, the national pride of the Americans, but.
Yeah, national pride, and I think NASA does have a bit more control when it's contracted specifically to send them up, or do you pay somebody else to do it? But yes, it's for NASA, of course, they want to have, and they should have more than one option. We'd all like to have backup plans. That's what good astronauts do.
So I mean, if we look at just that one aspect of it, the commercial space in terms of these Boeing and SpaceX doing trips up to the International Space Station. Now, you've been up to a space station on a Soyuz rocket, which is still the Soyuz rocket that's carrying people up at the moment. Why is it so hard to build something that supersedes something that was designed in the 50s?
Oh, I think what they're trying to do is rather than just do little sort of incremental changes, they're doing something completely different. So, of course, we saw Elon Musk's up and then the rocket coming back down again. I mean, that kind of thing Soyuz doesn't do. It just jettisons the stuff and they crash land in Kazakhstan. I mean, Soyuz stuff is 1950s technology, designed in the 1960s and just incrementally improved. And I think that's where it gets different. And I think Soyuz as well is it's this Soviet-style engineering. It's big, it's heavy, and for that means that actually it's expensive getting it into space. You've got a lot more fuel, but it's very strong. Physically strong. Whereas if you want to do something that's sort of much more flight, fancy, lighter foot, that kind of stuff, it goes up and down, you don't need to have so much fuel. It's the right way to go. But anything happens, then there's not an awful lot of leeway.
Yeah, it's clearly very tricky because the fact that we still haven't seen a crewed launch since the retirement of the space shuttle is...
I mean, of course, we've had commercial spacecraft dock onto the space station. They carried cargo. It's just that NASA hasn't trusted them with humans because they've got to have this launch abort, haven't they? Sort of scenario tested fully, and that's what hasn't happened yet. And of course, a launch abort for a cargo, well, you crash the cargo ship, fine. And NASA won't allow that to happen with astronauts. So I think that's it's those fail safes that they need to get right. But yeah, I mean, Russia's managed it fine with pulling people away from the Soyuz spacecraft. But you get quite a lot of G. These ballistic landings can be upwards of 8 and 9 G sometimes. And I imagine NASA wants to reduce that so that it's a bit more comfortable. And it gives them then, it future-proofs it for launches that aren't necessarily for astronauts that might be young, strong and fit.
Of course, the two astronauts, well, the astronaut and a cosmonaut, that when we last saw you, we just had that incident, hadn't we, where they'd
so that happened
had a launch aboard.
October time, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So they did finally make their trip to space, I believe.
Didn't they? And they had, yes, as far as I can see, seemed to have a great time. And of course, they launched with Christina Koch, who's still there. Yeah. So she's having this really long mission, and there's a huge amount of data that NASA needs. And from these long duration missions, I think this is the other thing NASA's realising, is that it's all very well sending people on even 2 or 3 months isn't really long duration when we're thinking about Moon and Mars now. Yeah. And all of a sudden NASA's realised that there's so little data. Astronauts themselves are already sort of selected from quite a small pool of people. And even then, the differences between individual sets of data, like the loss of bone density over 6 months of microgravity, you might lose 2% or over 20% of your bone density. So that's times 10. And many different examples are similar. So the differences between individuals is often, I think, bigger than the differences between let's say, categories of people that we might have. So it's just very difficult. And NASA's understanding that they've got to get a lot more data before they can really understand what happens to humans in space.
Yeah, and so this understanding of what humans are like in space, presumably that the long-term thinking is a mission to Mars.
Yeah, that's what we're all getting very excited about that, aren't we? And of course, every astronaut sort of is trying to, every astronaut who I know is trying to calm down. I won't say the excitement, because it's nice being excited about going to Mars, but to kind when people think about, well, are we going to go to the moon in 2024? It's technically possible, but there would be little point, because by going to the moon in 2024, we'll just get American boots, probably an American woman. Yeah. No bad thing per se, but what a waste if we can't then properly use that mission as part of a longer programme to get us to Mars. That's the whole point, is learning more and building a base so that we can use that to help us get further. But yes, Mars will be exciting. Actually, I think it's going to be the Chinese, still. And I know we're sort of jumping around a bit, but with landing that Chang'e 4 on the other side of the moon, not just that amazing feat of the stuff that they had to do engineering, technically, and managing that kind of mission, but they stated up front, this is all part of a long-term mission to establish a base, probably on the south pole of the moon. But part of what they're doing as well, they're learning more about radiation, which we didn't get that much information on, because the Apollo astronauts were on the moon for so little time anyway. So they're getting radiation damage, which is what we worry about in terms of people spending a long time out of low Earth orbit. And they've stated this is part of us having a base on the moon and ultimately going to Mars. And they've stated they want to get to Mars by the end of the 2030s.
Yeah.
They probably will. And yet, because we don't get the hype from them.
No. Well, this year's been a watershed moment because the Chinese have had more launches than anyone else, quite considerably more launches than anyone else this year.
Gosh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Fact.
and they've had some pretty good triumphs. And I think the Chang'e 4 mission I think's really, really interesting one. Because it's got a few international collaborations on it. There's a Germans and the Swedish, I believe, are involved with it as well. So that's interesting that the Chinese and NASA actually got involved, I believe.
I think they were supposed to, weren't they? I mean, that's what the Chinese and NASA says.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were supposed to share information, really.
Yeah.
But in the end, I don't think. Well, I'm not involved in the mission itself, but as I understand, not a huge amount of information got translated from one side of the of the world to the other. And I think that's NASA's lost a trick there. And I think the part of the problem is NASA just wants to go and get there first. And they're probably very worried that by sharing, the Chinese may just go and do it. I don't know the politics, but I imagine the race is on, but NASA and China are keeping it very, very close. China doesn't need to tell the rest of the world; they'll just do it anyway. Yeah. NASA is just wanting. It was quite clear. It's all about getting Americans to the moon. Yeah. They're paying lip service to allowing other people almost to take part. I mean, the Chinese gave the rest of the world actually an open opportunity to collaborate a few years ago. The rest of the world said, well, actually, we don't want to do it on your terms, because they were very much, well, we're doing it and you can just take part, just like NASA's doing. And I think, politically, that's the problem, isn't it, right now with America and China?
Yeah,
and
it's
not allowed to export technology.
No, but we're starting in January because January I think was a fantastic month, wasn't it? The Chang'e 4 mission had just landed, hadn't it?
Actually, because that came quite near the beginning. Yeah. We got very excited about another mission, which we might want to go on to but I think we lost a bit of Chang'e 4 and the excitement of that because of the other mission.
New Horizons.
Yeah, again, the NASA just, of course, I'm sure they knew that Chang'e 4 was about to land, they would have done, and wanted to beat the news. So, yes, in fact, there was quite an early news release, wasn't there, that, hey, isn't this a wonderful image? And we all went, it looks like 5 pixels on one side and 3 on the other, and we're not really quite sure what it's of. And a few days later, we had this amazing image, which I'm sure they would have waited for had it not been for Chang'e 4. Yeah. I think we would have heard a bit more about Chang'e 4.
Well, even more amazing, there was a third mission, OSIRIS-REx, that was completely... That was got to... what's the name of the astronaut? Bennu. On the 31st of December, so it was right at the end of the year. It managed to get into orbit.
Yes. But I think that's kind of a bit sort of second best as well, because of course there's the Japanese Hayabusa 2, which has sort of already been to Ryugu, and which, I mean, in my mind, really exciting. And the Japanese, of course, have had the Hayabusa. Well, they didn't call it Hayabusa 1, but it was the first asteroid sort of return mission, and they learnt a lot on that. But also they learnt, I suppose we all do, when the more you learn, you know what you don't know, and they learnt a lot about what they needed to study. And Hayabusa 2 is now picking up on all of that. So I think, I'm more excited about the Japanese one. Actually, it's going to return in advance. That because of what they learnt on the first mission, I think they're much likely to get some really good samples. And of course, they've gone into the asteroid, but that was later on in the year.
I mean, it was throughout the year, wasn't it? Hayabusa 2. What's extraordinary about Hayabusa 2 is how cheap it was. It seems to be this incredibly cheap mission. It's got 4 rovers on board. It's got this projectile that shoots into the asteroid.
And these rovers are doing some amazing stuff because, of course, the asteroid's got so little gravity that they don't need the wheels. Yeah. So, of course, very cleverly, they're saying, we'll just have little sort of hops. It can kind of just hop from one part to another. Great, and it's not going to get damaged because it's just going to come down nice and gently. It might bounce a bit, but but
there's been a little German rover, isn't there, that's been on that was part of that mission, and that's been there for a whole year, just roaming around and doing science with some of the same instruments that ended up on InSight, is what I was reading this morning. I was thinking that really is that's so. I wonder how much data is going to come from just that one part of the Hayabusa 2 mission.
I
So,
think,
yeah, that's
it's a whole load of stuff, isn't it? And you think about, and it's quite near Earth, so it's not huge distances away. But the fact that we can land on something that's got so little gravity, but yet it will give us all that understanding as we sort of see what's below the surface about how the Earth was formed, and water, of course. This is the excitement about not just going to Mars and surviving there, and perhaps long term on the moon, but where else in the universe might there be waters? There's lots of I think forward thinking in terms of that we can do with the knowledge about how the solar system was created and where our waters come from.
Yeah, that question seemed to only get more complicated, didn't it, with the Churyumov-Cheryshemenko.
Well pronounced.
Yeah, I've got a little song in my head, which is how I remember it. That seems to have been that really is such a great question, isn't it? Where did all the water come from? And if things like Hayabusa 2, because that lands in 2020 next year.
Yeah, back on Earth.
On Earth in Woomera, which is of course the place where the only British orbital rocket ever took off. So that should be exciting.
Yeah, I mean, really tremendously exciting.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean that open. Imagine being the scientists that get to open up the canister.
Yes. Well, of course, they've got to be so careful, haven't they, that they don't contaminate the sample.
Yeah.
And as I understand, they'll be in a nitrogen atmosphere inside a box, obviously, and then that box will be inside another box with a nitrogen atmosphere. And then when they do open them, they've got to be careful that the pressures of nitrogen are the same, otherwise they'll get an influx one way or the other, or they'll lose stuff, or you'll have an influx. So yes, it's very, very interesting, and they've got to be so careful. And as I understand as well, they some of the data from the first Hayabusa mission, so to another, I don't know the name of the first asteroid it went that was some Japanese name, Yakimoto or something like that. Anyway, don't quote me on that one. But they decided not to open some of the samples until they had worked out how best to do it. So that's quite a foresighted thing to do as well, actually.
Yeah. Well, actually, some of the lunar samples have been opened up this year as well. Apparently, so they've been kept pristine. It's like, well, let's keep those pristine until we've got some new technology. So, I suppose that's something that's happened in 2019.
It is, isn't it?
That I hadn't predicted.
Yes. I think the thing about the moon is that we didn't do very much digging down. This is the other thing about Changi 4, of course. It's gone into that crater, which is it's hugely deep. Is it something like 13 kilometres deep?
Yeah,
Something
it's
huge.
Yeah.
So the thought is that it's exposed bits of the mantle and the crust that we might not otherwise be able to see.
Well, yeah. Well, apparently the little Jade Rabbit 2 rover has actually has been rolling around in between its little sleeps, and has found a piece of has got to mantle rock. So that's managed to achieve something. I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, the Changi 4 mission, I think it's got so many brilliant, but it's got that Magpie Bridge little satellite that's out in the Lagrange
yes, of course,
point.
yes, it's
like a
transmitting all the
relay point.
data.
Yeah,
yes.
which is I love the name. I can't remember, Quiju or something. But the Magpie Bridge is such a beautiful name. Apparently, it's after it's a fairy tale about a magpie bridge that was built for two lovers to get across a river every now and then.
Oh, how lovely.
The magpies used to fly down and make a bridge. But all those sort of Chinese poetic things. But I think, in terms of what January was a great.
January, yes, it
was.
I
mean, January was just that was just epically good, wasn't it? I mean, we had those three big missions, Changi 4, New Horizons, and OSIRIS-REx, all kind of arriving at the same time, pretty much on January the 1st, really, wasn't it? It was all bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
And
a good time for news, of course, because there's very other news. News, so it's good for space.
Yeah, two of them made the news quite a lot, didn't they? So I think the like you said, the OSIRIS-REx one is a funny one because it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that Hayabusa 2. There's no rovers flying out or bullets flying out, but it does. Yeah, but there is a sample return. I think that's 2023. Like you said, we have to wait a long time. But they're similar asteroids, aren't they? The two.
I know, and actually, when you when you see images of them, they even appear similar. They're this sort of like diamondy shape, yes. And as I understand it, it's because the rocks that form them have just coagulated. I think the word is agglomerated. I think it's agglomerate rather than aggregate. There is a technical difference between those two words. So the rocks have come together anyway, and as they're spinning, so you create this kind of this diamond shape, bit like a sort of spinning top. But yeah, so I say in a way, perhaps a bit of a shame. Maybe it's good because we'll get lots of data about similar asteroids. Perhaps that's a good thing. But I would have thought, in my naivety about this, maybe it would be better to have gone and visited quite a different kind of asteroid. But meteor, but there might be other different asteroids, but there we go. Comets, let's say.
Yeah, well, there was some interesting announcement, wasn't there, from ESA? I think have got the budget for their asteroid intercept mission. I think, which is one that sort of waits around for. No, it's a comet intercept mission, isn't it? Where it waits around for comets or asteroids that it can go. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, great.
In orbit and go and swing out and get it. So
yeah, super.
So there's some good mission. There's definitely some good missions in the pipeline. But yeah, the Hayabusa 2. So Chang'e 4. Anything else from January? Let's have a look. Oh yes, well we had Musk's Starship that he was just built got blown over. So I guess the Elon Musk Starship has definitely been the most newsworthy story throughout the year, hasn't it? It seems to have given quite a lot of press interest.
Yes, I think we like it because it's him, and he always comes and does the press conferences, and he's good value for the media because sometimes he does something that's silly, and he's always very he's full of his own self-importance, I suppose, and he blags about everything, which it kind of is good in a way because we get the news out there. There's a lot going on that we don't hear about for other people, I think, as much. But in terms of what he has done, a huge amount this year. When you think of going from that time in January, gosh, and it does seem like that must have been another era completely when you think how fast the development's gone.
Yeah. I mean, it was round about, it was in January that we first discovered that it was going to be made from stainless steel. Were you shocked by stainless steel as a rocket material?
Well, it seems a bit heavy, doesn't it? I mean, but on the other hand, it's sturdy. So yeah, it's
because he calls himself the chief designer, Elon Musk.
Well, he calls himself an awful lot of things. Sorry, Elon.
I'm kind of impressed that I suppose he's putting his reputation on the line at least, isn't he? I know it's he definitely is a huge bragging personality, but it's where it'd be interesting to see where he's going to take Starship.
I think it's really great that he's got not just the interest, but he's really backing up that. And it's not like he's sort of tentatively adding a little bit of his money to a project that may or may not happen. He's really behind this. So yes, you're absolutely right. It's and it's great that we've got that kind of person. So long as we've got we've got enough sort of, I suppose, it's not just logistics, but it's the management behind all of that to make sure that things happen, the boring things happen, the backup systems, the safety checks, that things that need to link onto other systems in the future, the longer term things as well, that all that's going on. And I think they are, from what I know, and I don't know the company very well. For all that, perhaps he's not very British. I think that's the thing. But he's getting it done.
Yeah. He's definitely not very British. But from all accounts, that Gwynne Shotwell, who's the sort of SpaceX, she's the steady hand on the rudder by all accounts. Yes. She's a bit of a legend in that respect. The kind of
Well, that's what you need. You need one of either side.
Does Elon Musk need someone like that? Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, the company probably needs him too. But company.
Oh no, absolutely. What else? We had an interesting thing in January where Eric Bowe, who was supposed to be one of the Starliner test flight people, was replaced by Mike Fink because he was poorly or not, or for health reasons, which doesn't happen very often, does it, for NASA astronauts?
No, I think because of course they're selected and all of this stuff is screened out, but I don't know the details. I mean, it might be that the individual just decided he didn't want to go on anymore and put it down for medical reasons. It's kind of it means that he doesn't have to explain anything else, but it may well have been. So yeah.
Yeah, so that was an unusual one. And actually the saddest one of January was that the Opportunity rover died.
Oh, I know.
Or was officially declared dead. It had not survived a
But that did a
dust
grand
storm.
job.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, that's one of those missions. See, that's one of those missions where they say, oh, it's going to last 6 months, and it ends up lasting however many years that it lasted for, and doing that really was an ambitious mission for sure.
Yeah.
So February, right? So here's an interesting one that for some reason didn't have any fanfare at all, but maybe I'm interested to see what your reaction to it. Dave McKay became the latest British astronaut.
So this is the RAF?
Yeah, by flying the VSS Unity above the NASA definition of space. So have you managed to meet him, and has he joined your club of British astronauts?
So I haven't met him. As the Association of Space Explorers definition is doing an orbit of the Earth. So in that respect, he's not that in that club, let's say. So yeah, astronauts get some of them, but not all of them. Some of them get very uptight about who should be part of this club or that club. And I think yes, it's. As far as I'm concerned, if actually that barrier is going to of whether it's an orbit or not, perhaps I suppose that's one thing that is quite clear. But whether you go into where space starts and whose definition and so on, that's going to become very. We're going to get a lot of people in that intermediate place, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I think so. Should that person be called an astronaut because they went on the American definition or the rest of the world definition? I think that's a moot point, to be quite honest. It's what they do and how they progress things that's it's going to be interesting. But no, good.
Yes, the first Scottish astronaut is under the NASA definition. Does feel like he's squeezed in. Mind you, it's a pretty brave thing to do, isn't it? Fly the VSS Unity. So I guess Mars 1. Folded, so presumably that was interesting, wasn't it? I think Mars 1 was one of those ideas that at least it got people talking about going to Mars.
Yes, it did, and I think the ethical considerations were quite an interesting one around that. Whether we should allow people to go who actively want to die, and then I don't think that anybody who really works in the space industry thought that Mars 1 was a goer from the start. But you're right, it got people talking. And I feel sorry for those people actually who paid money and who actually thought that they really stood a chance because they were selected in the end, weren't they? They got through a selection. So I feel sorry for them that their hopes have been dashed and they were misled, really.
Now, in March... there was a couple of things. Well, actually, there's a big one in March, one that didn't happen that looked like it was about to happen was the first all-woman spacewalk. That didn't happen because of the spacesuits. Now, actually, I've got a question. Because the one thing I was amazed at was how few spacesuits had ever been made, and that they were still using the same spacesuits that were made in the early 80s and sort of still using them, and there was only about 11 of them and only 8 were working. That was absolutely amazing. Is that the same with the Russian equivalent as well?
So I don't know how many the Russians have got, but they don't change it if it works, kind of thing, and they're expensive to make.
Yeah,
they are very expensive, and if you're managing a project and you can get away without creating new ones, especially when you're thinking that actually for a long time, of course, NASA's been thinking ISS is only got a very limited time, because then it got extended to 2024, now it's been extended to 2030. They may extend it yet further, but I think while ever they were thinking that it's going to demise, and they would rather spend their money making suits that are designed for a different kind of spacecraft. So I think that's where the thinking was. And to be quite honest, I wonder how many people realised that there had not been an all-woman spacewalk before NASA said they were going to have one.
Yeah.
I hadn't.
No, I think I almost feel as though when you were listening to it, it was almost like, oh, is this the first? Well, let's look. Oh yeah, it happens
Yes,
to be the first.
exactly.
I do
Yeah.
think it kind of panned out like that. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone kind of realised it until it
Yes.
was. And of course, once they'd announced it and then had to row back on it, that was that was the. I mean, at least it did get done later on in the year. As
Yes, and I think actually what did the discussion that comes out of these things. So it's not just the technology, and it's not just what we do in space, but it's how that impacts all sorts of aspects of our lives. And when we think about then why it is that so few women are now astronauts, even though. For a long time, NASA has been recruiting women, and we think back through the history and the technology, and that NASA wouldn't recruit women because of the technology, and that this is how the toilet works and things like that. It is interesting that we can translate that into everyday life now and make sure that we do not have any more of those pockets left where I for instance I wanted to be a Navy pilot, a helicopter pilot. When I was studying at university, and the Navy told me, "Oh no, we don't recruit women for our helicopters because the seats don't fit." Seriously, hopefully, we can now take a really hard look at all of our organisations and just make sure that we are not denying. I'm not just talking about gender, but we're not denying people who have, of course, got all the skills and the knowledge, and they're really the most expensive thing in our organisation and the most useful, actually, most flexible. That we're not denying individuals the opportunity to do things because of some piece of hardware that could easily be changed.
Yeah, so presumably there was an issue with a lot of those spacesuits that had been designed in an era where there was far more male astronauts, so that had kind of a sort of a legacy of astronaut choice.
I mean, they were designed when around big Americans. Oh, you think about the Russians; they might be fairly broad, I suppose, but not as broad as also the Americans. So yes, the American suits were designed. So I think even the control panel of one section of the suit, the suits can't be made any smaller, because otherwise that will be wider than the shoulders. So it's that kind of technology where they're saying, we've got to the stage where we can't make them any smaller now. Well, yes, you can. You can change the control panel. But of course, that is expensive if you're thinking that there's a limited lifetime. So we can kind of understand it. But the amount of money that they spend putting people into space, getting them trained and so on. Let's just make sure that we're much more flexible now when we're designing hardware.
Well, it did seem later on in the year we did have a couple of announcements. ILC Dover, which is one of the sort of big spacesuit manufacturers, came out and almost like a surprise. Oh yeah, we've made the next generation spacesuit, and then NASA actually had a display of their new spacesuits. So for the Artemis,
eating humble pie, probably.
Yeah. So I guess I suppose they're in the pipeline still, but they just it seems like a technology that feels like it hasn't moved on, that you'd expect. It makes you realise just how incredible the Apollo era was, because it made so many things right, like the moonwalking spacesuits. They must have seemed, that's just a spacesuit. But now when you think, well, how do we make it better? It's really, really difficult to make it much better, and certainly not cheaper.
And of course, we understand now much more of some of the problems. So the dust that they had problems with on the moon, and of course the radiation. So we really need spacesuits to protect us from all the radiation. And then as soon as you start adding those layers of whatever it might be, water seems to be the solution at the moment, but there's only a certain amount of water that you can put around a spacesuit. So yes, we need new materials, and so this is where science can really feed in. And as soon as we have a wonderful new material that's flexible, I think that if we also need to think differently. So we often think about spacesuits, or we have to pressurize them, but perhaps we can have spacesuits that are actually quite almost in contact with the body. So they sort of press down on our skin around our legs, and so you only need to have a helmet part that's pressurized. So we don't necessarily have to have them pressurized with air all the way through. And so in some respects, perhaps although the Apollo, I agree with you, they did a huge amount of stuff that was great. We might actually already be training our brains to think along those lines rather than thinking freely. So we need some. This is why some of the people who really do think artistically, creatively, perhaps without that being dragged down by the technology that's already happened can give the scientists some good ideas.
Yeah, it's always a problem, isn't it, with science and engineering in particular, where it's like there is this solution to the problem and that's it, and of course you train in it, and when your professor's telling you that's the solution, it's quite hard to say, well, can we try something else? No, we can't try something else. but yeah, so it'd be interesting to see, because I mean the new NASA spacesuits look very much like the old NASA spacesuits. They obviously had, slightly better movement and were better at, like you said, the very, very sharp razor-like moon regolith protection. But yeah, it seemed like it's that's it. That's one question I meant to ask. With the Sokol spacesuits that you have, are they built for the individual, or are they off-the-shelf items?
No, the Sokol ones are built for the individual. Yes, so we basically stand in a room where our measurements are taken. Goodness, I loads and loads of measurements. I've never had a made-to-measure suit before or since, but it was, I can imagine Savile Row's got nothing on the Sokol space manufacturers. So they design the suits to fit. So yes, and they're not bad. There's some pipe work inside that still I found quite uncomfortable, but there's some degree of flexibility. You can sort of move it around to a certain degree. So yeah, and the idea is that the arm length, of course, that's really important to be the right length. Otherwise, your hands won't quite reach your gloves, or you'll have problems because you can't stretch out. So yeah, they're designed to fit and relatively comfortable.
Yeah. So they must be. So presumably, there's hundreds and hundreds of Sokols.
Oh, there's loads of them. We use them in training. They're used in the sea for sea training. So yeah, they're sort of to a penny really, and they get sold off. So there are people who I'm about to say NASA there, but there's presumably it's a Russian space agency. But yes, they are sold off to individuals. So for Dallas Campbell, I know, goes around the country with his Sokol spacesuit, and it's great. So you can sort of stand it up, and you can imagine putting it on.
Does he know the astronaut that it was tailor-made for?
I'm not sure he does. Maybe he does. Dallas, if you're listening, come and tell us. Who is it made for?
Yeah, that's interesting, because presumably if it's not your size, it would just be completely horrible to get into.
It's long. If it's bigger, then that's fine. So I used to use. I think I was given Svetlana Savitskaya's suit for training, and she and I are a similar-ish size. So that was all right. If it's too small, it's really difficult to get into. If it's too short, and getting the helmet part over your head is one thing, and then getting it off is really horrible. But yes, if it's slightly too big, it's not so bad for training, and you're not using it that long often in training. It's just a few hours here and there. Whereas, of course, if you're actually wearing it during launch day, you've got it on for, I think, how many hours? So you're sitting on the rocket for 2.5 hours before the launch, and then 2.5 hours after before you can take it off. That's about 5 hours, plus the time before the launch that you have to put it on. So it's many hours before you can take it off. Yeah, got to be comfy.
Well, they're supposed to be. They're coming out with a new design of Sokol spacesuit. There was a funny news article I saw where they had to return it because the tradition of weeing against the bus wheel. The new spacesuit doesn't have the flies to allow the astronaut to do it.
So they've decided to change it just for that tradition.
I don't know, but apparently it was the manufacturer of the new version said, "Well, you didn't put it in the spec."
Yes, hopefully that's yes, it was a kind of a nice tradition to have, but actually, again, Russians have got to also understand this business about everybody needs to take part in these things, and of course the women don't do that.
Yeah,
So you don't do something like that.
There wasn't even a female equivalent.
No, I know Soyeon-yi, the Korean astronaut, she wanted to take part in the tradition as much as possible. And so she even said that she could just take, even if it was just a small cup of water, it doesn't even have to be urine, doesn't even have to be hers, but anybody's, she said, would do. But a small cup of water would do, and she could just perhaps pour that over the wheel. Okay, she would use the other wheel if that... Yeah, but she said in the end they just didn't want her to do it.
This is something I I find really fascinating is that scientists and astronauts and engineers are so, science driven. Yet when it comes to things like rocket launches, they seem to become the most superstitious people.
Well, I'm not sure that. Yeah, this tradition isn't really a superstition, to be honest. It becomes a tradition, and it's kind of because it's peeing. It's kind of a bit giggle and funny, and you kind of want to take part in it. I think that's it. Is that people want to, just because it's a tradition. But there comes a limit, I think, where if tradition shouldn't drive what we do.
No.
It's nice to have it. We can create new traditions. We can remember the old ones, and there'll be some things that you may not want to change, but not if it's actually going to affect the way a spacesuit's made.
Well, no, absolutely. Yes. And you think, I wonder how many of these traditions start stacking up when you got things like, you have to have a bag of peanuts in the control room. You think, you've got to grow a beard. You're not allowed to shave before a flight anymore. It's just like, come on, it's gonna build up. So, that was. I'd forgotten about that story. I don't know where I read it. I think it was in Sputnik or one of the Russian news feeds. Right, so we're only on February. We better hurry up.
To zoom along.
We have to zoom along. So yes, actually, March, Mike Pence comes in and surprises everyone with the news that America's going back to the moon by 2024. This is where it all changed. So, what was your reaction when you heard that?
Complete hype, and it's never going to happen. And for goodness sake, yes, it's great and exciting, but let's not just talk about it. Let's actually do something useful. And I think it's it may happen, but it's like I just want it to be a useful happening, a useful occurrence. Let's go to the moon. We don't have to do it in this particular president's second term if he's going to get a second term. Let's look at the long-term view of this, and that's where if Trump really wanted to make a good legacy, he would be doing it in a managed way where we're getting the most benefit and the most cost effectiveness as well.
So, I mean, the only argument I can think that I think that there has been something good that came out of it is that it's added a certain impetus to get things done. Things like the SLS and stuff like that had just been dragging on and on and on and on, and you feel like, well, there's a brilliant phrase about if you're going to go to the moon at some point, you've got to go to the moon, and it's just like, well, yeah, actually that's really true, isn't it? So, I think as the years pass, when I first saw it, I thought it's totally ridiculous. I know a lot of people are angry because some of the international partnerships were being disrupted by it, and et cetera, and like you said, it kind of adds an element of it's suddenly going to be more expensive, it's less worthwhile, the science won't be there to do it. But as the years gone on, have you thought that, actually it has given a certain impetus to it?
Oh, it certainly has. And a lot of the development has happened much more quickly than might otherwise have done. And I know a lot of the PIs in NASA are saying, certainly on the surface will say, yes, absolutely, we think we can still do it. So, and you say it may actually happen. I just really want it to happen in a way that's that makes best use of the funds, but not to delay too much. So you're absolutely right. It's good to have a target.
Yeah.
Let's just hope that the target is not so unachievable that it then makes a mockery of all the stuff that they've done. Because if you develop something to happen in 2024 and then it doesn't happen for another few years, you might have developed something actually quite a lot better than the rush job that you did. And communicated better with other teams as well, and got something with that horrible old phrase, critical mass, but something that actually will roll forward in a much better way.
There is something that is inherent with space exploration is that if you put a date, it will you'll inevitably miss it. It seems that there's the most famous one that isn't like that is JFK's. We'll get there by the end of the decade, and they do. Which is one
just, but they do.
But it's still what an incredible feat. And you feel as though that at the beginning when he said that fact, you can kind of see it quite obviously that people were thinking, we're never going to do it, by the fact that all the flight controllers and people that they got in to sort of work there were just all the young kids. It was like, well, you lot do it. And it turns out that, of course, they're all absolutely brilliant and really good at what they do and actually make the mission work. But it seems to me that the good aspect of it is it pushes the agenda, and yes, I'm absolutely convinced they're not going to get 24. I'm willing to go down the bushes and put money that it's not going to be 24. But I think it'll have pushed it earlier than it would have done if you'd said, we're going to get people on the moon by 2028. Then you'd think, it's going to be 2030 then, isn't it? Or in space time, in that kind of. Not Einstein space-time, more Musk space-time. It's like it rolls forward. So, yeah, that was an interesting thing. It certainly changed the landscape a little bit.
Yes, and so they are still aiming for 2024, and I think certainly parts of the program will be ready by then. So, they may then those PIs can go on and support other people possibly in making it happen. So this is the thing, isn't it? Who's going to get there first? Will it be the Chinese? Do you think? Will it be the Americans?
So the moon, it's an odd one. The Chinese could skip the moon, couldn't they, and just go straight for Mars, and straight for Mars. Or do you think they would?
I think they this is Changi 4 and all part of their program. I think they've got a very, very firm short, medium, and long term plan. We only know parts of it, and we often only hear a bit when it's happened already. Parts of these certain parts, but Changi 4. Let's go to the moon. Let's learn about radiation. Let's learn about what's under the moon. Let's learn about so we can live there a bit longer. Let's learn what it's made of, because there may well be bits that we can use, but we don't know that yet. So that's it. Let's learn that. So it's part of this really long plan, and I think that the amount of investment that the Chinese are putting in, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they send astronauts to the moon. Before Americans get back there.
Yeah, that'd certainly be a shocker, wouldn't it? But it'd be. I guess it's good, and particularly if they embarrassingly involved some of the international partners that felt like they'd been slightly left out of the latest American adventure.
Yes, well, and of course with the relationship China has with Russia, then it's quite feasible that together they can do something quite powerful. And we may not want it to happen, but it can be quite powerful.
Right. So let's get on to April and May. There's some pretty amazing stuff here. I think April we can't go by without mentioning that there's three big ones in April. We've got the first picture of a black hole.
Oh, wasn't that fantastic?
Well, I think as a science story, that has to go down as the biggest one of the year, if not the decade.
I mean, wasn't the scientist herself recommended for some amazing award? I think possibly even Nobel Prize or something. But yes, it's absolutely an amazing thing. Yeah,
I mean, it's one of those classic examples of when the image itself, I think, is slightly disappointing. I think it's there must have been people going, but how do we tell this story to make people realise just how incredible this really is? How do we tell this story when we've got this image that looks a little bit looks a bit like
so far away, isn't it?
Well, it was just
tremendous, yes. But I think what the other exciting thing is that it was very it's pretty much confirmation of the theory, and how nice that is for so many people who've been studying black holes, and the mathematicians and all the people who work the software and so on. It's the image that they thought they would get, and there it is.
I mean, it's incredible. Even in my lifetime, I remember as a child, people talked about black holes, and they were kind of a sort of newish thing to talk about, but no one took them that seriously. And then it's like, no, they actually exist, and now we've got, in my lifetime, we've got a picture of one, or a picture of what it does to the surrounding area, rather than a picture of itself. Yeah, but I think it's such an incredible event. It was the same month that poor old Bereshit, which was actually my pick of the year for something that was going to be amazing. Unfortunately, it crashed. on the moon, which I thought, which does make you realise just how hard
Yes,
this is, isn't
it's
it?
still a long way. We're still relying on a lot of automation. I mean, in some respects, that's why people actually are more likely to make missions successful, because they can be flexible. You look at how Armstrong guided Apollo 11 over the moon's surface and landed in an area that was going to be better to land.
Yeah.
Had he not done that, had it been programmed, it probably would have landed and toppled us straight over.
Yeah.
But yes, it is sad.
It's really tragic, isn't it? I mean, it looks so good for. I mean, can you imagine Israel joining the club of, because it's only Russia, China, and America that have managed a soft landing on the moon. So that would have been an amazing achievement for.
And I'm not familiar with how much sort of support from other nations Israel got, and how much they really just did it themselves. But I hope they've learnt stuff that they're not going to disregard, that they will continue.
I did panic for a little bit, because I knew that the rocket engine that they were using for the landing was actually a British one, or made in Britain somewhere. But it wasn't its fault. So yes, that was the first of the unfortunate. Because later, of course, in the year we had the Vikram Indian lander doing pretty much a repeat performance of a missed opportunity. And we also lost Owen Garriott,
that's very sad. I mean, sort of beloved astronaut, and a lovely man actually he was as well. So I didn't know him hugely well, but I met him on a number of occasions. And I think he gave NASA such a lot of good advice because of all of his Skylab experience. And then of course he flew on shuttle as well. Yes.
Do you know his son?
So Richard, yes, I know Richard probably better than I knew Owen. That's probably more my generation. Richard's younger than me, of course, but yes, Richard gave his father a good send off at the Association of Space Explorers meeting we had in Houston, just not so long ago. But yes, we gave him a good send off. I think there was a tree now planted in his memory in Houston as well.
Because he's a sort of member of the British Astronaut Club, isn't he?
Well, Richard certainly is, because I mean, yes, he's definitely, he's got a British passport. He's half British, and he does a lot of good stuff for us too. He does come and give talks and supports the British Interplanetary Society. So it's been a good value for Britain. Thanks, Richard, if you're listening.
That was a sad one, and actually a really big one that I guess was overshadowed by the science of the black hole was that there was a Mars quake, the first Mars quake that
I'd forgotten about that.
Picked
yes,
up. Yeah. So that's I think that's a big one, showing that Mars is actually
it's still active. It's
still
not
actually active. That there's stuff going on.
I mean, perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised. It's similar size to the Earth. It's quite. It's quite therefore it's quite close to the sun. It won't have cooled off as rapidly as some of the other very, very far away planets. Yeah,
I suppose it's a bit like putting something very, very hot and it's cooling down and it's still cracking and still shrinking in places. Yeah, it's like an old house.
But we don't really understand the centre, do we, yet? This is partly why it's sort of quite exciting, and other things that have gone on about gases that have been detected. Perhaps we'll come on to those a bit later on. But yeah, it's all very interesting.
So then, yes, in May we have Bezos very rarely took to the stage to talk about Blue Moon, which is his lunar lander, which I think is actually one of the interesting spin-offs of Trump's Get to the Moon Soon plan. Artemis is this commercial lunar payload surfaces, the CLIPS. Have you been following that story at all?
So only in the part of Artemis and so on, but it's I think the Bezos is a really interesting guy because we don't hear so much about him because he's not the same kind of character as Elon Musk, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bezos manages to get there. He's doing things in a perhaps a calmer way. He doesn't have to be the first; he just has to get it right. And yet he's investing hugely, and I think there's a very strong chance that that's going to get there.
So he could be very much part of this Artemis program. But the clips in the whole could be some interesting, because there was also a British lunar rover announced that's part of that CLIPS program, which is this little space bit, looks like a little spider. Have you seen that?
I've not seen this one. Who's making that?
It's a company called Spacebit. And it's gonna fly with a lander called the Astrobiotic, I think, which is what's the name of their lander? Astrobiotic is the company, but they've got a lander, and they've got this little, almost like a spider, four-legged spider that's going to crawl across the lunar surface. That's the that's the British part. That's as far as I can see, the only British entrance into that whole.
British engineers certainly will be involved in a big chunk of hardware on Gateway. So I think that's very positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, the Gateway. So the Gateway's been on and off-ish kind of all year. It seems, because that's the bit I don't get what's happening with it. Because for me, the Gateway does seem like a good. It's got a lot of people that don't like it, but I can see the attraction of having something where you can test. Yeah. Where you can test trips to Mars and what it's like to be on a spaceship that's going to Mars.
Absolutely. No, I think it's got a lot of advantages. So the Gateway, in conjunction with a base on the moon where you can store things, because there's a limit to how much we can store on Gateway. And on the moon, we'll hopefully be able to actually manufacture fuel, get water, hopefully. And so there's a lot, I think, to be said for a good combination, which is why I think, we shouldn't just go to the moon quickly in 2024. We need to develop these things in conjunction so we've got a good long-term plan. I think Buzz doesn't like Gateway, does he? And he's made no...
Van Zubrin and people like that. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? There's the anti-Gateway brigade, but I can see the advantage of it. And the fact that you can go to any part of the moon quite easily because of the funny orbit that it's
and we
in.
know how to... Now, we're really experiencing docking onto space stations. We don't need to worry about that. I think when Apollo went to the undocking and redocking, they were just doing it themselves, and that was a scary factor. But now we're good at that, and we can keep astronauts alive, and we understand about feeling weightless, and it's being up there for significant lengths of time, probably much safer than people being on the moon itself. Let's. I agree with you. Let's use Gateway. Let's have a gradually enlarging base on the moon to suit our purpose, but in conjunction with a Gateway, possibly two in the end. But we'll start off with one.
So the Gateway wouldn't have to sort of grow as big as the International Space Station, because you've got this almost like a storage on the moon.
I think so. I think that would make sense to me to use the lunar base as a physical place to store stuff. The astronauts may be better in a space station that where we haven't had to erect it on the moon, on the lunar surface, because of all of that, the hazards of being on the surface there and having to wear a spacesuit in order to erect a habitat. We've got our space station. We can erect it in modular bits. Yep. We know how to live there. So let's use that and learn about the lunar base in conjunction.
Do you think there's going to have to be a moment where financially maintaining a International Space Station around the Earth and a Gateway is going to be tricky for someone like NASA, or do you think that?
Well, let's hope that we have a bit more than basically NASA and Russia. So China will have its own space station, don't doubt, and China will be going off to the moon and then to Mars. So there's more than just the International Space Station partners, I think.
Yeah. In fact, the Chinese, at some point in the year, the second Chinese space station came back down and burnt up in the atmosphere at some point. I can't remember when that was, but that happened this year and the year before. We had an uncontrolled Chang'e 1 come down, and then this year, I believe they controlled the ascent of that one. So in fact that was in July, I believe.
Well, that's why we missed it, because of everything else going on.
So I suppose if we're going to talk about anything, is Apollo. And the Apollo celebrations, and I know that you got heavily involved in that. So how was that for you?
It was, great fun. It was such a delight to feel, I suppose, a bit part of all of that excitement, and yes, I think there was festivals that would not have otherwise included information about space, whether it was space science, whether it was, I went to Blue Dot and there was Monica Grady talking about meteors and so on, meteorites. I was there, James Burke, fantastic. And I got to meet James Burke. I got to interview him in the Science Museum, so in front of an audience. I hardly interview, he's such an easy person to chat with. He was lovely, and it's great that we've got, I've had that kind of experience, as well as all of that stuff that we got to hear about Apollo, and people who just weren't born when Apollo 11 happened, when any of the moon landings happened. I think for those people to realise how significant that was to a whole generation, and how amazing it was actually. I mean, although I was born, I was only 6 when Apollo 11 happened, and I just grew up with the moon being part of our culture, because I had no concept at that age of how difficult it was to get there. So poems about the moon, that's what we did in English language lessons at school. So it wasn't. It was exciting because we had to do projects about it, but I had no idea until much later on what an amazing feat that was, in terms of the engineering, the design of it all, the management of missions like that, and the skill of actually piloting these things, and the bravery of those astronauts. So it was huge, and it was good just to get all out again, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, for me, that reading through each of the different things and saying, that is just incredible. And like you said, it's very hard. I think even if you have a passing as an adult with a passing interest about space, I think it's quite difficult to actually see how hard it was. I think that there's an element of it where you really have to understand how hard it is to fight against Earth gravity just to get into low Earth orbit, and you think, oh my gosh, it's actually ridiculously difficult. And we haven't really invented a new way of doing it either, because this was one of the things people were chatting with me at work, and these are people that don't have a massive interest in space, but the one thing they're interested in is why haven't we gone back to the moon again? And it's just like, because it's really difficult. I don't think it's very, very hard to convey how ridiculously difficult it is. But I think that was the one thing that came over for me in that Apollo 11 season.
And how different it is from operating in low Earth orbit, getting to and from low Earth orbit, piece of cake, and how much further away the moon is, 1,000 times further away than where International Space Station is. So, it's been good to think about it. It's been good to, I think, it made us also think about the future, actually, and that's also been very good. So it's not just let's celebrate something that happened 50 years ago, because 50 is a nice number to have, but it made us think about why we haven't gone back and what we have to do in order to do that, to get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the so many things went right for Apollo. That's the thing I can't get my head around. I mean, obviously there was the tragedies during the Apollo 1 and the near tragedies of Apollo 13, but but so many things they got so many things right, even the lunar rendezvous and the way that they were actually going to approach the problem.
Because they threw investment at it, didn't they, in terms of money, people equals money, I know, quite often as well, but that huge investment that the Americans were prepared to put in that, huge amount, in quite a short space of time. And it just goes to show how much we can do. If we do work collaboratively, teams work together, because everybody wanted to get people on the moon. And if their team, it wasn't just about my team's job and I just don't want to be the one that's blamed for anything, they just wanted to work collaboratively for that huge common goal. We need to remember sometimes that's what achieves the great things. It's not just about an individual, being adulated. It's the goal that everybody's working towards that's the great thing.
Yeah, I think you touched on it just a second ago about the management. Just actually, I think NASA, that whole era of people that were working at that point, they invented a whole new way of working on a project that was literally out of this world. And actually, there's something I missed off the notes actually here, but we lost Chris Kraft in that
oh yes
that era, and I think he deserves a shout out as being one of the sort of great architects of the whole program and keeping a really steady hand on the rudder. He was
Yes.
obviously a really fantastic person. I know people who knew him personally. He couldn't give people enough time.
Yeah, no, we gave him a posthumous award in Houston at the Astronauts Congress. It was, I think he had a great amount of respect from many people.
Yeah. So that was sad, but I think he just about made the Apollo 11 celebrations, which is not true of a lot of the Apollo astronauts, isn't it? So we are at the end of that era. So it's kind of time we did have a new era of out of Earth orbit.
Yes, but I think you said earlier as well, it's there were so many young people working on Apollo, and I think it's that itself also is enabled them to be quite creative, not bogged down by technology, and that had gone before. They could they were prepared to give things a go. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully there'll be a whole bunch of new young people that are coming into.
But the other thing, actually, before we leave Apollo, is that there were so many events around the country, events that happened in places that I would not necessarily have expected to get excited about the moon. Libraries had reading summers all about space. There were cathedrals. I actually went to a number of cathedrals to talk about space. So centres of religion, where the deans are saying, yes, we want our people. We think it's right that we think about space and about science, and we understand that because it does improve life, and it's good to debate these things. We don't just have to turn a blind eye to that because we've got to believe in our religion. So I think it was really, really great to bring so many people together to think, people from walks of life who would not necessarily say have come to think about space.
Yeah, and I think, on an even kind of broader point than that, I suppose the Apollo 11 celebrations took everyone's minds off the tedium of of several things going on in Britain. It was, for me. It's just like, actually, look, when we all club together and we can do stuff. Look at the things that we can achieve, and it is. Good old America for doing the Apollo missions, because it's a spectacular beacon of what you can achieve. I think, as is the International Space Station. I think if anything, the International Space Station might even be more so because it's such a collaborative effort.
Yes, and the Americans have learnt a lot actually from that collaboration with a culture, the Russian one, that is so different to theirs, where they've sort of past superpowers, rivals superpowers, and where in space rivals as well. So I think it's been a lot of really good lessons have come out of ISS.
Well, one thing I've noticed with astronauts, that they talk about their Russian colleagues on space stations with a lot of love and respect. That it seems that it is. Do you think that's really, really important for people to work with people across a perceived barrier, so that they can...
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's how science has gone on, and how we get the best results in science when we're collaborative, and when we have people coming from different backgrounds, so you can think about different impacts for the science that you're doing, and even if it's complete blue skies in terms of, let's say, pure scientific research, you've got people with themselves that are from a diverse sort of mindset, and they add hugely to the science, bring in aspects that you might not otherwise have considered. And in space, yes, it's great that so the management people on the Earth work together, but in space, the astronauts are really learning about individuals in a very, very personal way, and it's so important to build those friendships. So they last forever, those kind of friendships.
Which it actually takes you back to that point that we made earlier about getting stuck in a certain mindset, isn't it? With the more inclusive you can be of people, bringing them in and thinking about different things in different ways, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that's not done more often.
Can't agree more.
Yeah. I have to say that's I'm very much on that tip this year. But maybe that's a legacy of learning a lot about space. I think is that space is clearly a lot of great things happen, and science as well. When you look at the science of that black hole picture, it involved pretty much every corner of the world. We're involved across all the different science papers. Was there anything exciting that happened near the end of the year? Well, I'll tell you what's happening right now, actually, is that we might actually have missed it.
Oh,
is the CST 100 test?
oh,
It's actually, I think
it's happening today. Yes.
I think it might be happening right now. I'm just going to go to my.
So I'm just back from.
I've got an app called Space Launch Now, which I have to say is absolutely genius for things like this. Let's have a look.
So I've missed out some of these.
There
things.
we go.
Oh,
Launch in flight, 16 minutes. So there
Perfect
it is.
timing.
It's actually up there. Yeah.
Great.
So that seems to have happened.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
So that's one. That's one. Seems. There we go.
Oh, everybody's celebrating.
So
yeah.
yes. There you go. So that's interesting. So that's that. As I sit here, we looks like we're just about to start a new era of American flight into space. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah. So good end to the year.
Yeah, we managed to end on a high note after. Yeah, I mean it's. Yeah, that so few of the things that I thought were going to happen at the beginning of the year got delivered. Was there one particular massive highlight for you this year?
I think perhaps not such a highlight. Obviously, Apollo was the really exciting thing that was going on. I loved this. I'm getting excited about Hayabusa 2 and all the things that are going on there, and firing the projectile into the comet, into the asteroid got me. I think we'd most mention though perhaps some. So there have been 3 sad events this year. So we mentioned Owen Garrett already. Because in September we lost Sigmund Jähn as well. So such a beautiful man in so many different ways, and a great loss for the Germans, but also he provided them with so much support, and he was so good at his collaborating with the Russians as somebody who really understood how to work a team and how to get people involved. And of course there was Alexei Leonov, wasn't there, as well? So we lost him. So that's another sad time. But nonetheless, it's 3 people who. Towards the end of their life, they've had long lives, and they've put back so much as well. It's not just that what they did in terms of their space mission, but how were they able to use that as well later, and each did it in their own way.
Yeah. So you knew Alexei Leonov? Oh,
Alexei, yeah. I mean, I met Sigmund as well a few times, but Alexei I knew quite well because he was my boss in Star City.
Oh wow.
So he was in charge of the foreign astronauts, the non-Soviet astronauts, when I was there towards the end of the 1980s and the very early 90s. Then he retired from that not long after my space mission. But he was in charge of our whole training, making sure that we didn't come to any harm. A hard job to have, probably, because we're all quite diverse, and we were coming from our own backgrounds of wanting to be independent, and yet the Soviets knew that actually they just looked after their astronauts, and they wanted us to be part of that. So some fun things that I remember of Alexei. There was one particular evening where he was so desperate that Ryoko Kikuchi, the Japanese backup, and she was doing her training at the same time as I was. We were going off to a party, and he was so desperate for us not to go to this party. I don't know what he thought this party was going to end up like being, but I think he thought it was going to be quite a good party, let's say, that we shouldn't go to. And so he was desperate to distract us. He invited us to his house, or his flat. He cooked pilmeni. He explained how to make pilmeni. He took ages doing this. He fed us with pilmeni and more pilmeni and more pilmeni, and we were full to bursting. And eventually, about quite late on in the evening, he bid us farewell, probably thinking that the party will be coming to an end. But of course, we knew it wouldn't be. So Ryoko and I sloped away and went to the party full of pilmeni, but we could join the party then. But no, he was just such a he was ebullient and the life and soul of parties. He knew how to get everybody involved, actually. So if he felt somebody was left out, he would make a big thing and bring them into the unit. And then you wouldn't be aware, actually, but if you occasionally I'd spot that he himself had then gone off to another part of the social event to bring somebody else in. He was very, very good at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love his face. It just looks like he's got such a. There's always a sort of twinkle of mischief in his.
Yes. Well, of course, it was Alexei who created this pink frilly outfit that he got a dressmaker to make. I had no idea. This was at the launch site in Kazakhstan in the 2 weeks of quarantine. He goes off to a dressmaker, takes all my measurements that, of course, have been made for the spacesuit, and so they know exactly how my size. And this dressmaker, at Alexei's request, he chooses this blooming pink stuff to make it out of. These great big frilly shorts and blouse combo that he then tells me to keep a secret from my commander, stuff inside my spacesuit, and then after the launch, when I take off my spacesuit to try and put it, he tells me a little sort of area inside Soyuz where it'll be out of the way, where Tolia wouldn't think to go looking, so I could keep it a secret until we have our special dinner on board the space station, and I could then float through wearing my pink frills. Thanks, Alexei. But yeah, he knew not only that it was going to be fun in space and so on, but he also knew that I would kind of squirm at wearing such a thing. and so yes, the whole thing, the delight, I'm sure, I couldn't get out of it.
Well, that's what a sad miss then.
I know, yes.
Yeah.
But again, somebody late in life, he's done so much in his life and contributed in so many different ways. So it's great to remember people and the things that they've done. But yes, that sadly time does move on. And
I mean, he will always have the record as the first person to do a spacewalk. That's it, isn't it? I mean, that's an incredible thing. Never be broken. That's
the first spacewalker ever, and what an achievement. And he would have been probably the first person on the moon as well had Apollo not so rapidly progressed in the way it did.
Yeah, so he I guess I suppose in that way he's the Russian Armstrong, wasn't he?
Yes, and of course then became Apollo Soyuz and struck up this relationship with Tom Stafford from the Apollo side, and right through the rest of their life, both in work and in private, they were really, really good buddies. Tom Stafford went to Alexei's funeral. I mean, Tom's not a spring chicken anymore, and he made the journey and was there at the funeral. So it just shows how those ties do bind you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that it's what a great advert for space, really, in terms of joining people together. So I think that wraps it up for the year. We've had it even though all the things I said were going to happen didn't happen, it's still been an absolutely jam-packed. I mean, we've not even mentioned things like the transit of Mercury and stuff like that, but there was a lot going on in the year. So thank you very much for running through it all with me.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I just love your knowledge of all of the detail and stuff behind that. It's great that you're doing this podcast. I think because we have and there are people who otherwise wouldn't have access to such a variety of good, in-depth stories from you, stories that are accurate as well. And that's the thing. You get people to talk who they were really there. They know what they're talking about. This is it's not secondhand.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Even in the edit, I'll still go through and fact check because I can't bear the thought. Because I've done it before where we've left something in that's not quite right, and you go, no. I don't. The fake news thing. You don't want to keep perpetuating something that's not quite right. Yeah, it's. But thanks very much. Thank you very much for coming down. And it's a pity that Jamie couldn't make it.
We miss Jamie.
Yeah.
Jamie, we'll catch up. I'm sure, Jamie.
Yeah.
I look forward to that in the future.
Got to go and see into the miserable weather now. It's not looking very Christmassy, is it, outside?
It's not very Christmassy, but I'm just back from International Space University in Strasbourg. And although that was warm and a bit damp as well, of course it looked very, very Christmassy in Strasbourg. So not at ISU in particular, although they did have a good tree there. Part of what we were doing there was we unveiled. We did an astral panel. We spoke with the students, but we unveiled a statue to the cat Felicette, the French cat who went off into space. So Yeah. Christmas will come.
That statue was who organised that? Because I remember seeing a Kickstarter.
Yes, exactly.
Was it that Kickstarter?
It was exactly that.
Oh wow,
yes.
yeah, because we had that. Yeah, we mentioned that. I think a couple of years ago. Mentioned that Kickstarter. So it actually all came to fruition.
Yes, all came to fruition, and there's a beautiful statue. So there's a bronze Earth, and this beautiful. I'm sure it's not really what Felicet looked like. As far as I can see, Felicet was a pretty bog standard chunky moggy, but this beautiful, elegant kind of cat is with her tail curved around the Earth, is sort of looking skyward. Now in the International Space University's main hall.
Oh well, I've been saying the name wrong. I've been calling it Felicite, but that's.
I think it's Felicet. Yes, it was.
Felicet.
I think yes. It was good. Of course, it's the female version of Felix.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh well, that's. So what have you got planned for 2020? What's your big?
So 2020, I must get a book published. So that is, I've
Are we allowed to know what it's about? Or?
Well, the first one will be. I have a number in my mind, but probably one a year. So this one will be a children's book, science stuff that we learn from science. Sort of it won't be a very long book. It will be quite short. Sort of almost like something that can be flicked through. You might read a page at night. You might dip into it in between times. But yeah, something short and sweet, but that gives them a flavour of what it's like in space. But actually, is teaching science and teaching love of science through it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, there can be no better book if it gets people into science. Yeah. Any particular theme about it, or is it?
It will be astronauts. Yes. So being in space, but yes, and thinking obviously about the future, because the young people are likely to be those that are going to be most impacted. And if it's not they themselves who might go to Mars, which is wow and exciting, and many young people would do that. And are seriously considering wanting to be astronauts. I get asked so many times, what do I have to do? And then people really asked, they're going to be studying STEM subjects to give themselves those opportunities and doing all sorts of other exciting, wonderful things in their life as well, I hope, because that's what will make a great astronaut and a great astronaut team. But yeah, the young people will go to Mars. They will make use of Mars. They will and use that as the beginning of a whole new era.
You're not going to invent any new ice creams then this year?
Now there's a thought.
Yeah, you've done Mars. You should start going out into different planets. Pluto ice cream.
Yeah, Pluto ice cream. Yeah, there we go.
A sort of smaller portion.
And very hard.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. Thank you.
My pleasure entirely, Matt. Thank you very much for inviting me.
The Interplanetary podcast is alive!
Wow.
There we go.
That
Yes.
was incredible. Comprehensive, interesting, passionate. And that was just Helen.
Wow. I can't believe how much we got the year wrong. It was supposed to be the year commercial space came of age, and none of it happened. No commercial moon landing, no commercial providers of astronaut flights, no commercial space tourism, no commercial space internet. Well, sort of, actually. The commercial space internet probably was the one that came along the most.
I think we just got a bit excited last year.
Yeah. So I've put a massive list on the blog of all the things that happened in the year, all the sort of highlights of everything we've talked about this year. So if you want more details, why don't you run over to the blog and have a look?
Get yourself over to blog. And the website is www.interplanetary.org.uk.
Or putting the ace back into .space.
You are so modern, Matthew.
Jamie, do you want to hear my final space fact of the year?
Yes, please.
Well, it's a sort of combination of facts. It's been 100 years of the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, which we talk about a lot because they, of course, decide what planets and stars and asteroids are going to be called.
What a beautiful century. Congratulations, team.
Well done. So that's 100 years of astronomy unions, and now we're living in an era where it's been longer than 50 years since we first ventured onto another celestial body.
God. And I think next year it's going to happen. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm not going to do the same as last year. I'm going to be more cautious.
Well, we'll see in our preview of the year next week, Jamie, what we come up with. Well, let's see if we can keep our 100% record of being totally wrong.
Well, Matt, on that note, would you like to encourage any of our handsome, gorgeous listeners to maybe give us their thoughts of their predictions of 2020 so we can read them out?
Yes. In fact, let's do that. Anyone got any great insights? Let us know and we'll read them out.
Matt, what kind of medium can people let us know on?
They can tweet, they can Instagram, they can go via the contact on the website.
What, a good old-fashioned email?
Yeah, or if you're a patron, you can obviously talk to us in the Discord.
And if you want to send Matt any night nurse, then he will be leaving his address on the Instagram channel very soon.
Excellent.
Night nurse.
Jamie,
Yeah.
Upon that note, I wish to thank all the patrons for all their support this year.
Oh.
And shall we let them get on with furthering their winter festivities and looking forward to the new year?
Enjoy yourself, stay safe, have a few drinks on us, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you so much for all your support. And if you are interested in becoming a patron, you know where to head. We just told you the website, interplanetary.org.uk.
Bye-bye, Spot Cats!
See you later, yeah?